To improve efficiency, profits, and competitiveness, artificial intelligence will come to represent a cornerstone in the American banking industry in the near future. Whereas a loan decision could take your average officer hours, maybe even days to process, artificial intelligence could do this in just a few seconds. Whereas a team of accountants could take weeks to compile and report a bank's financial statements, artificial intelligence could do this in just a few minutes. The potential benefits of artificial intelligence in banking are extensive, but despite these advantages, there are many risks that AI poses that must be mitigated for it to have the desired positive effect on American banks. And Microsoft must be aware of these risks, as well as government's likely response to them when developing and selling its AI and banking products. On behalf of the HCM Tower Scholars, my name is Bradley Potts. I'd like to welcome you all today as we'll be discussing a set of strategic recommendations for Microsoft to consider as they enter the AI and banking market. As over this past semester, we've been researching government's likely response to artificial intelligence's integration into banking. And from this research, we've developed a framework for Microsoft to adopt as they enter the AI and banking market. Particularly, Microsoft should adopt a developmental framework that ensures its AI and banking products be transparent, which Tim and Zach will be discussing, that they be secure, which Sydney and Ryan will be talking about, that they be without risky characteristics to the market, which Ben will be discussing, that they be workforce friendly, which Destiny Rose and Emily will be talking about, and that they be respectful of customer privacy, which Noel and Evan will be discussing. But before we jump into these recommendations, it's necessary to first understand what we mean when we're talking about artificial intelligence. As in general, artificial intelligence is the application of computational tools to address tasks traditionally requiring human sophistication. In other words, it's using computers to do things that would otherwise require humans to do. But whenever you think of artificial intelligence, what exactly pops into your mind? Maybe it's the Terminator. Maybe it's R2-D2 from Star Wars. Or maybe it just looks something kind of like this. But this sort of artificial intelligence, known as artificial general intelligence, is the type of artificial intelligence that has understanding and reason and can mimic human behavior. But this sort of artificial intelligence is not a currently available technology, and is certainly not applicable in the AI and banking industry today or in the near future. So instead, when we reference AI, we're referencing artificial narrow intelligence, which is the type that is applied to very specific functions in a very limited context. And whether it's online advertisements recommending you products or you interacting with your smartphone's assistant, artificial narrow intelligence is already everywhere in our lives. And in the banking industry, there are many different applications that Microsoft can look into as they consider entering the market. There's customer-based applications, those that can improve the customer experience and banks' pricing models, like AI chatbots that customers can interact with and recommend them investment decisions. There's operations-based AI that can improve banks' operational efficiency, like financial AI accounting software that can compile and report banks' financial statements in a very short amount of time. There's trading and portfolio management applications, those that can reduce investment risk and identify unique investment opportunities for banks by using something like sentiment indicators, which is where artificial intelligence scans across all of social media and identifies customers' changing preferences and then trades based off this information. And there's a growing area of artificial intelligence known as RegTech, which is where banks use artificial intelligence to ensure compliance with the vast variety of financial regulations. And all these areas represent ones that Microsoft can look into as they enter the AI and banking market. But they must be aware of the risks associated with these products in banking, as well as government's objectives when regulating it in the future. As government will have 4 primary objectives in the future when regulating artificial intelligence's integration into banking. The first is to maintain market stability by minimizing systematic risk, which is risk that is incurred by the entire financial system, and when elevated, increases market volatility, interest rates, and the likelihood of a fiscal crisis. And so government will incentivize or disincentivize the use of opaque, homogeneous, and fragile AI systems to maintain market stability. And of particular interest to Microsoft is that government will likely disincentivize reliance on third-party providers, and that by relying on third-party providers, it makes systems more homogeneous and thus adds risk to the market. But we will discuss how Microsoft can mitigate some of these risks in just a little bit. Second, government will have an objective of maintaining workforce stability by discouraging the widespread adoption of applications of AI that will result in severe short-term job loss. Third, government has an objective of promoting the ethical and secure use of artificial intelligence in banking. Ethical in the sense that it's unbiased and non-discriminatory, and as well as respectful of customer private information. And secure in the sense that government will likely require AI and banking products to have comprehensive cybersecurity capabilities and protocols to implement in the event of a data breach. And finally, government will have an objective of enhancing efficiency and profitability of banks, and thereby growing the overall American banking industry by incentivizing AI's adoption because of its many efficiency advantages. And this would involve minimizing the regulatory burden on AI's adoption, as well as ensuring AI's access across all economic classes by perhaps offering smaller and community banks tax incentives to adopt artificial intelligence. But Microsoft must be aware of all these risks when developing its products, and we'll be discussing in our framework what these sort of risks are and how Microsoft can mitigate them. So now that we have an understanding of what is AI and government's objectives, I'm now going to hand it over to Kelsey to discuss what Microsoft's themselves objectives should be when entering the market.
Given the mission of Microsoft, it should be Microsoft's goal to empower banks with secure, ethical, legal, risk-minimized, and workforce-friendly AI systems. Microsoft has always been at the forefront of innovative technologies, seeking to be a lead innovator while keeping in tune. By providing cutting-edge AI technologies to companies of all sizes, Microsoft can help grow the United States economy as a whole while increasing the company's own profits. Microsoft seeks to be at the forefront of innovative technologies without going around government regulations or putting its customers at risk. Microsoft seeks to provide the best product on the market, not necessarily the first available. This entails providing a safe-to-market technology that can sustainably endure successfully in the market. Safe-to-market technologies do not threaten national security and pose less threats to the company of Microsoft as a whole. The government of the United States is also incredibly interested in these safe-to-market technologies as to limit risks to their citizens and to the economy at large. And as Bradley just discussed, one of the main objectives of Microsoft is to ensure government compliance. There are 62 million jobs in the United States and the financial sector. And the financial sector helps facilitate and finance many of the United States' exports. This gives the United States great interest in promoting the successful implementation of an AI system in the financial sector. Lastly, given Microsoft's customer-centric culture, they seek to provide customers with AI technologies that are secure and ethical so that their consumers can succeed as well. We are now going to present to you our framework as to how Microsoft can utilize these tools to pursue these objectives. And that starts with making sure that the products are transparent and available to a wide range of consumers.
As Kelsey has done us the honor of explaining, transparency needs to be engendered in the products that Microsoft is going to develop when it comes to AI. But in our discussion of what it means for AI to be transparent, we've not really gone much into the way of detail as to what that transparency really contains. To different people, transparency will carry very distinct connotations, but we want to lay out a minimal threshold as to what we consider transparency to be, so that whenever Zach gives our recommendations later on in the presentation, we have an idea of what it means to have an ethical AI. These AI systems must be predictable, they must be auditable, and they must be explainable. They must be explainable, and they must be auditable in the sense that when we look at an AI system and we give them their output, their inputs, we need to be able to point to the factors that help determine their outputs. We need to determine what it is that the AI is deciding is a critical factor for whenever they render their decisions. They must be explainable in the sense that not only do we need to know what factors it is that are really determining it, but what it means for a factor to be good. In other words, it's one thing for a credit score to be determined as something that is going to be determining whether a person is going to get the credit card that they apply for. But it's another thing entirely whenever someone's going to have whenever someone has a credit score, whether or not that credit score is considered acceptable or unacceptable when they're applying for that credit card. A desirable AI program is going to be able to enable us to know what is the distinction between those two different faculties, and also enable the auditors to observe both features. And lastly, we want AI to be predictable, in the sense that whenever we have these conversations with people, they're not going to just end up having persons not have an idea of what the discussion is going to be about. The rules need to be simple, and they need to be continual, so that way whenever we have these discussions, those people aren't necessarily without a paddle in the creek. AI cannot throw away the books on banking just because they desire efficiency. They must keep things somewhat predictable so that the actors that are human can continue to interact with one another without having to worry about things being taken out from underneath them. The recent push for AI comes in the realms of neural networks and deep learning. With the right amount of data, the neural networks that we currently have are able to produce analysis that is much better off than the actual human counterparts can usually do. But this comes at the cost of transparency. Neural networks currently operate within the guise of a black box, where we can know what are going to be the inputs for these, and we know what is going to be the output, and we can observe the outputs. But we don't really have a sense of what the network is doing when it comes to making those decisions. We can't peer into the black box. And even if we could lift the veil on this black box, there's this real sense that we still wouldn't know what's going on. Take this image of the neural network when it comes to 5,000 papers regarding the language used discussing machine learning. As you can see, there's a connection between computer vision and astronomical surveying that is there, but we have much of a difficulty in trying to understand what it is that is being said there. The connection exists, but as far as trying to transcribe that, even some data analysts and the creators of such programs really struggle when it comes to finding what they're trying to decide, when they're trying to see what is making these decisions. Applying neural networks to the financial sectors creates even more of an issue. AIs with the power to control loan applications, or to render decisions on loan applications, are one such application of AI that we would want in the financial sector. However, doing so produces its own issues. It would enable us to essentially go out and have all those jobs taken by the AIs and enable us to produce those sorts of results much faster. But when they do that, we don't necessarily know if they would give us those explanations without a bias that we would be able to observe after all things were said and done. We would demand answers if, for example, that AI was presenting results where male applicants were giving more of a preference to female applicants, or if it was this case that Caucasians were getting more of an acceptance than other races, as has been evidenced whenever neural networks are being applied to other fields. When the logic of such a program is biased or exhibits such bias and issues, we want to have some sort of idea as to what we could do to fix it. But currently, as is, that seems to be an issue with neural networks. Permitting such opacity causes immense amounts of predicaments. Looking past the flaws of this sort of intelligence, however, artificial intelligences have a real issue when it comes to meeting the financial sector, and in particular, one specific type of issue, the financial regulations. Turning back to our loan example, whenever a loan applicant is given a loan rejection, they are required by the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to be given a reason as to why they are rejected for their loan. However, an AI as it is, because it is a neural network and unable to really sort of point to those areas that give that information, doesn't really do much in trying to essentially give a black and white answer. Data analysts are required to go a little bit further, and whenever those data analysts are either computer scientists or people who have even created the program and they don't know what it's sort of go on to be since it was created, there's a real issue when it comes to trying to figure out why those rejections are being rendered. Transparency is required when it comes to the financial sector. And if AI is unable to meet those sorts of legal requirements set out by our government, there's going to be a very, very slow sort of application of AI to the financial sector. At the same time, AI, when it comes to confidentiality, is something that is also rendering it a little bit of an issue because AI is handling data which could be considered confidential and private. And if that information is ever exposed to the public, you have a real danger of risking that sort of information to bad actors, endangering the person's financial future if those information that is particularly pertinent, such as credit card information or social security numbers, are leaked at any sort of way in the process. That clash will be covered more in depth by Noel and Evan towards the end of our presentation. In the meantime, we're going to turn over to Zach so that he can discuss why it is what Microsoft can do when it comes to engendering a product that meets the ethical standards that we would like for our AI.
Speaking to the role of the CIO, there are several measures that Microsoft can take while preparing to integrate AI systems, fintech, and to achieve appropriate standards of cybersecurity for enterprise security. These measures will pioneer industry standards and further corporate thought leadership. As previously mentioned, it should be Microsoft's goal to produce technology that is the best in the industry and is safe to market, and also producing technology that is sustainable. In order to achieve this, security measures must be integrated from the conception of its design to address the new and uncertain concerns that arise with artificial intelligence technologies. Beginning with the implementation of AI safety procedures and principles during initial development, such as iterative testing and debugging, is fundamental for developing these technologies and having safe and reliable code. Of course, no code or system is 100% reliable or secure, but implementing these techniques to try to make sure that whatever technology is developed is with a forward-looking manner to make sure that there are fixes that can be implemented during development as well as afterwards. Additionally, operating with the assumption that any system can and eventually will fail, but implementing these standards to make sure that they operate to the best of their ability, it is imperative that this integration is from the beginning and that these systems will function even if there is a breach. So gauging prior to implementation the ability of these systems to operate even if there is such breach or in a degraded state, that there are measures in place for cutoffs and fail-safes to protect the financially sensitive information and mitigate these concerns as well as insulate the breach will produce value and viability for these products. To the extent that Microsoft's products cannot be hacked or subverted, they will provide a foundation of enterprise security for their affiliates in banking. This foundation will also further both corporate and national security. Ryan will now speak to the wider implications of cybersecurity.
Sydney outlined many of the corporate aspects of cybersecurity as it relates to artificial intelligence. I will now discuss on a more enterprise-focused level how Microsoft can implement artificial intelligence in a responsible manner. There are several aspects that Microsoft should consider. First of all, that Microsoft's clients in the financial sector are often large institutions, large banks, which means that they have an inherent connection to national security. It's also important to consider here that because these banks are so large, if one were to collapse or have some sort of major issue with its artificial intelligence systems, the stability of our nation's economy would be severely threatened. Taking that into account, we recommend Microsoft take several measures in the national security area. First of all, Microsoft should become a responsible third-party provider to work with these banks to help them secure their systems such that their artificial intelligence rollout will be less rocky and for the most part stable, although as we'll get into later in our presentation, there are certain inherent risks to artificial intelligence. Furthermore, Microsoft should prepare by taking into account worst-case scenarios and as a third-party provider to also engage in red team exercises so that these major institutional clients are well protected. Additionally, using the Azure platform, Microsoft can implement open source AI tools that will help smaller fintech startups protect themselves and their systems. So we also think that Microsoft can rely on its existing prominence and prestige to set industry standards. This is where we acknowledge Microsoft's current role but also propose Microsoft build on its existing prominence to become more of a thought leader within the Silicon Valley space. This involves collaboration between the federal government, Wall Street, and Silicon Valley, so that Microsoft's artificial intelligence platform and best practices can become an industry standard. With that, Ben will now discuss the riskiness characteristics of an AI rollout and how we recommend we mitigate these.
Thank you, Ryan, but I think we'll go back to Zach for a little bit more about cybersecurity.
Thank you, Ryan. Let me start with a given. Microsoft is a large corporation, and it is likely to have lots of capital, both physical capital and human capital, and have, as a result, economies of scale. Just as Microsoft has its cloud computing platform, Azure, and its business intelligence software, Power BI, Microsoft can promote the ethical use of artificial intelligence in the financial services sector by developing a software specifically for the analysis of a firm's proprietary financial data. Now, you might be thinking, why would firms use this software when they could just use Power BI for the same purpose? There's two answers to that question, a simple one and a complex one. The simple answer is Dodd-Frank. The complex answer, ironically, is also Dodd-Frank. You see, big banks will spend billions of dollars a year trying to navigate a convoluted web of financial regulations. Something that looks a tad like that. Microsoft, however, can take advantage of its economies of scale, credibility, and expertise and invest in developing an artificial intelligence that removes the bulk of those burdens from financial service providers. Now, transparency, as Tim mentioned a few minutes ago, does mean different things to different people. I, as someone who has used and trained a neural network in the past, still can't tell you what exactly the algorithm does to arrive at the prediction it makes. But neither could the average CFA. A Microsoft engineer, on the other hand, would be able to explain to the relevant person, a regulator, what exactly the AI in this platform actually does. That's why Microsoft, by making available a transparent, ethical, and regulatory compliant AI, can seize an opportunity that other AI-driven firms have not been able to. Now, we've also found that there are a few prerequisites for balancing these two competing goals. First, other smaller AI-based companies have been unable to convince banks and lenders to adopt AI in their business operations. Primary reason for that, of course, is these financial regulations that I've talked so much about. Microsoft, on the other hand, has the credibility to where when it goes to its potential clients and says, use our software, you'll be free of that burden, they can be trusted. The second is simplicity. Now, I know using AI and simplicity in the same sentence sounds a bit like a paradox, but let me use an example to explain what I mean. Take a convolutional neural network, one that is used solely for the task of computer vision. In this neural network, there will be millions of neurons, billions of weights, and thousands upon thousands of hidden layers. The inputs to this neural network are the pixels, the individual pixels of an image, and the outputs are any possible item that could be seen in that image and classified. In contrast, consider a deep neural network that is used solely to crunch financial data. That neural network in such a case, most outputs in the financial services sector, however, can be simplified to a binary output. For example, the decision to approve or reject a loan applicant, or the decision to buy or sell security. Now, I know it's not that black or white, and there might be other values that can be predicted, such as the valuation of a company. But the point is that simplicity is going to be incredibly important in ensuring the auditability of an artificial intelligence. That's why we recommend that Microsoft take the lead in developing a relatively new technique known as the information bottleneck. This technique seeks to optimize the predictive accuracy of a deep neural network while limiting the complexity and the size of that neural network. It does this by identifying the features that are most important to the accurate prediction of the target variable. As a result, Microsoft has, as I have said, the chance to promote the ethical use of AI in a sector that has been traditionally blamed for a lack of standards in the past. And now to talk a little bit more about the incentives and disincentives of AI in finance is my colleague, Ben.
Thank you, Zach. Yes, so now we will be moving on to discussing mitigating the risky characteristics of AI in banking. Namely, there's 3 ways that we can do this. The first is minimizing the homogeny of AI systems and the fragility of AI systems when they're being applied in the financial system. Second, we can focus on ensuring auditability of these AI systems. And third, we can focus on ensuring an equitable data distribution to smaller community banks. So first, let's discuss homogeny. What is meant by AI homogeny? This is when AI systems take in similar inputs and give very similar outputs across the board. So what this would look like is if you had 100 banks, and let's say they all use a similar AI system, and as a result, they all of their portfolios, all of their trading profiles recommend giving similar outputs in terms of their decision making. Now, this is an issue because this poses systematic risk to the financial system. It does this because as these banks are using similar outputs, you can see massive fluctuations in the prices of assets and what banks are recommending to do with their portfolios. Second of all, in terms of AI fragility, minimizing AI fragility, this is important to minimize because this is the susceptibility of AI systems to fail in any given context. So if AI systems receive false inputs and give out a false output, that would be considered a failure. And we can see a combination of the failure of the robustness of these AI systems and the failure of using homogeneous AI systems in the 2010 flash crash depicted on the board there. Now, what happened here is there was a fraudulent sale order that went out, which resulted in high-frequency trading algorithms, which were homogenously used across the financial sector, and were very fragile in that they took in a false input and gave a false output, which resulted in a very large fluctuation in the prices on the stock market. So this is something that we want to mitigate and avoid when implementing AI into the financial system. Moving on to ensuring auditability. Ensuring auditability is a given. Frankly, the financial system is one of, if not the most regulated sector in the entire economy. And as a result, Microsoft needs to prepare for the auditing that's going to occur by the government. How can they do this? Microsoft should focus on researching and ultimately implementing regulatory technology for the government to use on the AI systems it ultimately creates for the commercial sector. Therefore, you'll end up with the government employing Microsoft systems to audit other Microsoft systems that are being used on the commercial side. And I believe that this will ensure systematic compatibility and that Microsoft systems will be better able to audit and regulate other Microsoft systems and other systems. However, if Microsoft chooses not to do that, then Microsoft still needs to ensure that their systems will be auditable for whichever type of system that the government wishes to use. Lastly, on the point of ensuring an equitable data distribution to smaller community banks. This is rooted in research done by the Federal Reserve, which states that if the large banks are able to utilize massive amounts of data because they can accumulate more data because they're large banks, then they will be able to build more effective AI systems and be able to beat out their small competitors, their small local bank competitors. As a result, we lose this key center of competition within the financial sector between community banks and these large multinational banks. And so what can be used is what is called an application programming interface, or API, which has already been used in banks and businesses to ensure a flow of data between banks and businesses. Now, the nice part about this is that it has been used in banks, but it has not yet been used in AI and banking. And so we view this as a great opportunity for Microsoft to penetrate the market for AI and banking. And now we will hear a little bit from Destiny Rose on workforce issues.
Thanks, Ben. As Satya Nadella has taught Microsoft, the tech industry does not respect tradition. It only respects innovation. This ongoing innovation has been a huge boon, not only to the advancement of technology, but to society in general. However, As history has taught us with the industrial and digital revolutions, it has also been a constant displacer of workers. Workers in the financial industry are currently incredibly likely to be displaced by AI technology. A recent study found that credit analysts and loan officers are 98% likely to be automated. And Vikram Pandit, the former CEO of Citigroup, has said that he believes the financial workforce will be reduced by 30% in just the next 5 years. That sort of workforce disruption is going to raise national unemployment, which means it could draw the ire of the federal government. The government, in turn, could attempt to disincentivize human replacing automation with something like the robot tax that Microsoft's own founder, Bill Gates, has called for. Unfortunately, as the recent congressional Zuckerberg testimony has shown us, legislators don't always have, shall we say, a working knowledge of highly advanced systems. That means they might not be capable of responsibly mitigating the workforce impact that automation is going to have in the financial sector. In short, they're going to need Microsoft's help. Microsoft is already an established and trusted force in the tech industry, so you should start leveraging your collective expertise now to reach out to legislators and committee members to begin a discussion about what a responsible mitigation plan for the impact of AI on the financial workforce might look like. This doesn't have to be Bill Gates' robot tax. In fact, considering the movable and changeable nature of AI code, a tax on robots probably wouldn't be an efficient way to raise money to retrain displaced workers. Instead, Microsoft should research and advocate for effective incentivization and de-incentivization plans to encourage other companies to follow Microsoft's own example and internally replace displaced workers, just like Microsoft did when it shut down Windows Phone. Plans that could work will be ranging. You could get examples like tax breaks for companies that maintain or grow their US workforce without reducing the average salary, or maybe public-private partnership retraining programs for displaced workers, or maybe even national and local subsidies for post-secondary education in areas that are growing, like cybersecurity. Whatever it is, by solving and at least working on the workforce problem now, Microsoft can combine the insights of ex-CEO Bill Gates and current CEO Satya Nadella by being both an aggressive innovator and a responsible corporate citizen. Emily is going to talk to you about the specific workforce issues in cybersecurity.
Thanks, Destiny Rose. Today, there are an estimated 350,000 open cybersecurity positions in the United States. And by 2021, that projection will be 3.5 million for the globe. Now, this talent gap contributes greatly to both the and the frequency of breaches occurring today. And unfortunately, that 2021 projection is based on the use of conventional cybersecurity software. So with the widespread adoption of AI technology, there will be new failure modes, and that projection will grow. Now, as you all know, defense, especially in the age of AI-enabled cyber attacks, is much harder than offense. So having enough qualified cybersecurity professionals that are able to work in teams with AI programs, correcting false positives, and taking action on real threats will be critical to the successful implementation of AI in the banking sector. Now, continuing to offer and enhancing and expanding upon currently available programs such as Microsoft's AI residency program and prioritizing intra-company training on working in human AI teams will be necessary steps in accomplishing this goal. Now, stimulating the growth of this field doesn't just benefit Microsoft, it benefits its financial clients. Your financial clients will be in need of qualified cybersecurity professionals with a demonstrated knowledge of AI technology in order to defend their companies. To put it quite simply, without enough qualified cybersecurity professionals, your financial clients will be breached regularly. So now I'll turn it over to Noelle to discuss privacy issues.
Thank you, Emily. Protecting privacy is an important standard in general, but it is especially crucial in banking because personally identifiable information, or PII, is deeply ingrained in the financial sector. PII includes things such as names, addresses, phone numbers, social security numbers, people's attitudes towards personal finances, such as whether they regularly make their loan payments on time, It also includes contractually protected data, such as non-disclosure agreements, negotiated instruments, and really any material non-public information. The implementation of artificial intelligence in banking could cause public uncertainty about the protection of their private information. We use Microsoft's 6 principles of privacy as guidelines. These are control, transparency, security, strong legal protections, no content-based targeting, and making sure that all data being gathered is for the direct benefit of the consumer, or as Microsoft calls it, benefits to you. Because this is such a sensitive topic, we have 2 types of recommendation in regard to privacy. The first of which are seemingly obvious, but equally important measures Microsoft should take to assuage public concern and continue its strong history of protecting privacy. The second type of recommendation will be addressed later by my colleague Evan, and it is innovative ways Microsoft can address the growing privacy issues with developing artificial intelligence. Microsoft's yearly education and tests to ensure that its employees have an active knowledge of the importance and protocol of handling personal data is going to be even more important with the implementation of artificial intelligence and should be continued. Additionally, technicians who have direct access to personal data pertaining to finance should have to undergo additional assessments to ensure that they are aware of the current laws and regulations of the financial industry, such as the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, which limits financial institutions' ability and therefore their software from releasing PPIA regarding transactions and debt. The FDIC follows the Financial Services Modernization Act, which mandates that banks notify their customers of any changes to privacy regulations and give them the option to opt out of sharing their information, along with a reasonable amount of time to make that decision. These regulations will undoubtedly be applied to Microsoft's financial AI software, so open communication is very important to increase public participation. So, the main part of the policy for privacy is this privacy by design concept, which has 2 parts: data encryption and legal agreements. Microsoft should work to encrypt personal data to ensure that identities are removed from AI outputs, which is similar to how they already remove unique identifiers, such as IP addresses and cookie IDs, from their search engine data before they send it to third parties. In addressing the legal aspects of privacy by design, Microsoft should continue its practice of notifying customers to any change to the use of their personal information, especially when artificial intelligence has been incorporated into that use. In addition, they should add concise, easy to understand executive summaries at the top of all privacy updates, so it is clear to the consumer exactly how their information is being used, so they can make an informed decision about whether they want to accept or reject these policy changes. By adding these executive summaries, Microsoft has the opportunity to lead the conversation regarding public education of artificial intelligence. They can set the standard for consumer interaction with AI policies. This emphasizes a respect for each individual's ownership over their data and privacy, and directly aligns with Microsoft's top 2 principles of control and transparency. These recommendations are an extension of Microsoft's current privacy policy and are easy to immediately implement. Evan will now elaborate on where Microsoft can go from here to develop further privacy in regard to artificial intelligence in banking.
So Microsoft is a multinational corporation, and as such, it develops its products to be useful and accessible in a variety of global markets. To this end, you should look to the most recent and strictest regulations regarding the protection of individuals' information when you're developing your products. And these most recent and strict regulations happen to be the General Data Protection Regulation of the European Union, which will come into effect exactly 1 month from today. Specifically, the GDPR stipulates that privacy laws apply to all corporations that are using individuals' information, regardless of where that information is processed, which is a change to current regulations. And it places emphasis on privacy by design, which Noel just spoke about, and it adds a right to be forgotten to every individual in the European Union, Now that right to be forgotten could be especially difficult for any corporation seeking to design an artificial intelligence that will process PII. Now, a quick distinction I want to make is looking to the GDPR should not be conflated with treating artificial intelligence in the same way that Europe treated the internet, in which excessive regulations ensured that Europe never became a dominant force on the internet, but instead it should be considered the gold standard in the protection of individuals' information in the ever-increasing market of artificial intelligence. So it's an important distinction to make. And to this end, to achieve this high standard of security, we're going to recommend an innovative solution that doubles down on artificial intelligence. It's too soon to tell how this right to be forgotten will be implemented in AI, but it very well could mean that any artificial intelligence that was trained using the data of an individual that has since opted to be forgotten is now rendered invalid. Now, an obvious and the least creative solution to this problem is to completely wipe your AI and retrain it using a corrected data set, but that takes time, and that's time in which your customers can't use your product. And there's no way to know how frequently that would have to be done. There's no way to know how frequently people would opt out and choose to be forgotten. So what we suggest to you is to design a secondary AI system that is intimately linked with your products, that will operate in a GAN-type faculty to clean your products of information of people that have opted to be forgotten, and to monitor the outputs of all of your products to ensure the protection of PII. Since its introduction in 2014, generative adversarial networks, or GANs, have quickly become a popular method of improving neural networks, and we believe that with Microsoft's research and development capabilities, that you could design and implement a similar program to monitor and adapt any products that you make for the financial sector. So to conclude our presentation, in keeping with Microsoft's current guiding principles regarding the development of any sort of artificial intelligence, we believe that any AI tools that you develop for the financial sector should be fair, accountable, transparent, and ethical. We've given you practical solutions to ensure that these principles are met. So by solving the hidden layers dilemma and by ensuring auditability, that will help increase the transparency of your products. By implementing enterprise and corporate cybersecurity, and by focusing on the privacy by design model, you can ensure that data is handled ethically. By designing a heterogeneous AI system that helps satisfy the accountability principle. And by maintaining a strong relationship with the government, you can ensure fairness in the workforce as AI develops. Now, we recognize that these recommendations take time and a lot of resources, but we believe that they fit best with Microsoft's long-standing history of designing and providing the best products on the market rather than the first products in the market. Microsoft has always provided high-quality products, and they've always placed the customer first. And we believe that you can continue that tradition by considering our recommendations. So we thank you for your time and attention, and we look forward to your questions and your comments.
So I do have some questions. When we talk about transparency, part of transparency is also being able to explain why. So tell me to what depth you feel like we need to be able to explain how and why, and how that would be any different than the human interaction that takes place in banking today.
I guess that question is sort of targeted towards me. Explaining the how and why, I think it really comes down to financial sectors, is that we're trying to look at the specific examples to really sort of highlight the things that we can at least say, at least in the example I provided for loan applicants. We want it to be that we can say with a degree of certainty that there are factors that are more contributive to the end results than others. We've had the issue where, if you look a few back, you have things regarding computer vision. I believe it was called AlexNet recently, which came up with sorts of about 5 million different factors it used when it was looking at trying to recognize images. And that's actually considered fairly, that's a limited amount of resources in comparison to what is looked at in other sorts of images, so on computer vision. So you have the sense that before that it was about 3 times that number, and then since there was hundreds of millions types of factors that they're looking at. When we want explainability, we want it to be so that we can try to limit those factors down to sorts of areas where we can target it. So if it is in fact the case that there is loans that are being applied or being rendered due to race, is that a reflection of the fact that people of a certain race are a bad bet, or is that a reflection of the fact that there's just a bias in our current financial system that is in the data set? And if that's the case, we really want to isolate those and try to figure out what is really predicting of the scenarios we're trying to improve loan applicants. And I believe that's...
Okay, so based off of that, if those calibrations weren't even part of the data set, then how could we ever imply a bias?
If those calibrations, so you're saying that if race was not taken into account?
Race is not taken into account.
I think that in some scenarios, those types of things might even be found in other ways. So if it's not race, it could be name. So if you have someone who's named Muhammad, you could find another sort of scenario where those information. If you're trying to say that essentially we're only looking at data, we're only looking at the financial items, I do think that you can find a lot more ways to limit what it is. I just don't believe that that's really indicative of explainability anymore. I think it's just trying to eliminate some of the biases, and I think that is a good way to sort of try to highlight what you want in your AI. I just don't believe that it's explaining much.
Okay. Fail-safes. Can we talk about fail-safes in some of the cases that we've seen in the recent past of failures of data protection and so on? We won't mention any particular names, but I think we're all very familiar with the ones that have happened as of recent. Those were caused by human interaction. When we talk about fail-safes for AI, where do we need to really pay attention? Is it with the AI itself, or is it with where we interact as humans with that information?
So where I saw focus in my research, I did see, yes, there are a lot of attempts that if you're a good hacker, you target the personnel, not the system itself, and that's kind of a common trend in what is happening currently. So having these AI systems may eliminate some of those phishing attacks and things of that nature, but something that we talked about in class is even with autonomous vehicles that are supposed to provide another level of safety, if you put a post-it note on a stop sign, it misreads it, and that's something that we hadn't, or that developers hadn't accounted for, and it could potentially ignore the stop sign, causing an accident, so on and so forth. So I think there are different failure modes that could potentially come up with the AI. Of course, not as a programmer, don't know what all of those may be, but just having things in place that if something is recognized, there are measures that can shut down that system or correct it while in operation.
Okay. So what would those fail-safes look like in your...
I would suggest maybe having some type of external personnel that has kind of a emergency button stop on whatever is happening. If it's something that is manipulating data in an incorrect way, or that the AI system is misreading the data or producing incorrect data, that they can go in and stop that manipulation manually.
And I'd like to also speak on, aside from cybersecurity, where a human failsafe is probably necessary, also in the area of financial stability, a human verification on AI systems, I believe, is also a very significant component of it, and that has to do with AI's fragility, where typically, as you may know, AI systems are usually, they're more fragile because of their very specific and narrow functions like that. And because of that, oftentimes it may require a human to shut down an AI system if it's making the type of trades that resulted in the flash crash. And the problem and the reason why that's necessary is because we don't have much historical data on financial crises. We have the 2007 crash, we have crashes in the past 50 years or so. We don't have the kind of data to inform an AI model of certain surprises that can intervene within an AI's trade that may require humans to verify that as well. And so maybe when it all comes down to it is that AI serves as much as an enhancer of human products, as well as humans also serve as a sort of check on AI. And I believe that there's a happy medium between that we've kind of talked about here as well. So I'll speak on that.
So that brings me to another question that was brought up a little bit later. We talked about things being very homogenous and everybody's AI across the board within banking making the same types of trades and so on. In today's economy, we don't do that anyway, right? Morgan Stanley may be different than Chase, and everybody has their own ideas of whether a stock is strong or bull or strong sell, those types of things. Wouldn't it be a bolster to make sure that we follow the trend that that company has always followed, not take into account of just the current market, but also what that company has done in the past?
Yes, and that's exactly what we mean when we're talking about heterogeneous systems. It's Microsoft having its platform, but then catering that platform to individual banks' trading strategies, overall credit decision strategies. And what that does is it caters it better to those businesses, but also eliminates that sort of homogeneity that increases the risk of the market. And by reducing that sort of risk, I believe that would make Microsoft's products even more valuable to its clients as well. Okay. Yes.
We talked earlier, someone talked earlier about an auditing system. When you audit software or you're auditing the results of that software, generally you have to bring in a third party to do any type of audits within an organization. So you can't necessarily supply a product to go in and do the audits for the product that you're actually building. You would have to work in conjunction with someone else to give them the APIs to be able to go in and audit. So what other organization or what other group would have the wherewithal to be able to go in and do that other than Microsoft?
I believe that's towards me. I think that I think that's a fantastic point, and I guess where I was getting with that is that the system being implemented, the Microsoft system being implemented on a micro level by one firm, can be audited by another system which was developed by Microsoft but is being implemented by the government is what I'm getting at. And so essentially they're two different entities, and it's not Microsoft auditing Microsoft, it's the government using Microsoft to audit a financial institution utilizing another Microsoft system.
Okay. Being able to offer this product to both large and small organizations, being able to the 1 and 2 bank systems versus the 50,000 branches worldwide, how would one best present this to us as Microsoft in a way that we could go back to our customers and supply them with a pricing model that would be palatable to both large and small?
So an area about the small banks, and something that my research came out and that I kind of discovered, is that in the future, once AI becomes very regulated into the banking industry, I believe that government will end up offering tax incentives to smaller community banks to adopt AI simply because of its efficiency advantages. Because the government has a huge interest in promoting the growth of banks in general, not necessarily the large banks. And so I think that Microsoft might, having that government relationship that we keep, that comes out through our entire preservation, having that relationship with government and understanding those types of incentives that may be in place for smaller banks may help bring those pricing models to smaller banks as well.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that. So within the structure of the Federal Reserve, the Board of Governors at the different Federal Reserves around the country have, by law, 3 of them have to come from local banks. And so the incentive structure is already built into the Federal Reserve System to protect smaller banks. And so just like what Bradley said, it's a very high likelihood that they'll be ensuring, like what we talked about, an equitable data distribution, but also the implementation of AI systems for these smaller banks to ensure that they're competitive. And that's something that I found in my research a considerable amount of Federal Reserve research has been dedicated to how do we ensure AI can be implemented effectively with these smaller banks. One of the ways was ensuring that they can have access to data to ensure that their systems are effective.
Currently in some of our pricing models, such as Exchange Online and Azure, it is strictly around utilization and usage that is what you're charged for. Is that a pricing model that would be acceptable, do you think, to a smaller bank versus larger bank?
Well, if the smaller bank is going to use the system on a smaller scale so they wouldn't have to pay as much for it, is that what you're getting at?
Right.
Right, so I think that would be acceptable.
When you look at Exchange Online or O365 or anything like that, it's large enterprise organizations with 250,000 employees, obviously, because it's per user, per usage, how much information is passed both up and down. If we put that same type of pricing model into an AI that is cloud-based, then does that not incentivize the smaller companies to do the same as a large banking institution would?
To do what as a large banking institution?
To utilize the product.
Yes, I think so.
I think smaller banks the current pricing model that Azure looks at, that Azure utilizes as well, I think is also a very attractive pricing model that Microsoft could use when selling its AI applications to smaller banks and larger banks as well.
So somebody brought up cybersecurity retraining. Retraining the workforce when we talk about cybersecurity. Obviously, once we start putting AIs into place, security is going to be a huge risk. As much, if not more, than what it is today. We're going to remove some things, some concerns, and some worries. So are you saying that Microsoft should build training models that could be implemented inside an organization?
What I'm suggesting is that within Microsoft, you focus on retraining interested employees to be able to work in human AI teams, cybersecurity teams, that is, and also going off of your existing programs, your AI residency program. I see that as being like a great opportunity to kind of bolster the field because there is such a huge gap in the cybersecurity job market. So I think that is a small but still impactful way to bolster that very important field in cybersecurity.
Okay. So currently we have at least 5 different avenues of retraining and training models for cybersecurity. Would it not be beneficial for the companies that are bringing in the AI to try to retrain their employees?
With Microsoft, send them to Microsoft to be retrained?
There's organizations throughout the globe that utilize Microsoft training models.
Yeah, I think that would be the smart decision. I mean, my consideration focused way more on what Microsoft could do with itself and with its existing training programs, but I think that's a fantastic opportunity to bolster that field as well.
So that goes back to the conversation that we had about how we work as corporate leaders in the government and working with the government to incentivize retraining models and working to not displace but retrain.
Right.
And
I think that would be an attractive sort of way to advertise it is we're not replacing you with AI. We need more people now that we are implementing AI because AI-based cyber attacks means that there will be new failure modes. So we're going to have way more people than we anticipated that are knowledgeable about AI attacks so that they are able to aptly combat these attacks. So I think that, for lack of a better word, attacking this gap from every direction necessary is the smartest decision, but definitely a small step that Microsoft could take would be what my suggestion was, which is to retrain its own employees and expand upon its existing programs. But I think that's also very smart, is to advertise it heavily, that, hey, we can retrain your IT employees as well, so that they will be able to defend your company. So yeah, I think that's fantastic.
I think what Emily is speaking to, is a suggestion that we kicked around, would be not only providing AI, but providing an AI package. So when this would probably be something offered to larger clients. When a larger client like Chase came to you and said, we want to institute AI, instead of telling them, great, here's our platform, here's a few things that we've personalized to you, go wild. You say, great, here's our platform, here's a few things we've personalized to you, and we would love to provide you as well with 30 hours of video tutorials, 2 manuals, yada, 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 as an explanation of the system that you're giving, so that this is not Chase having to hire brand new talent and figure out how to work with the system that you've given them, and neither is it Microsoft saying, we're going to get in your business, Chase, and we're going to take control of your IT system, but saying, we have the resources, we have the expertise, and we've put it in layman's terms for you, so that if you would like to replace your internally displaced workers, you can with our system. That sort of an AI package would be something that Microsoft could do externally. There are also other more general and less specific options, like some larger companies participate in national scholarship programs. If Microsoft wanted to bolster the cybersecurity workforce through a program like that, it would probably be very successful.
As a corporate citizen, though, we would need to work with the U.S. government to help facilitate some of the funds to become available for retraining some of these people, to make it easier on not only the individual but the company as well, right?
Absolutely. I think a close relationship with the government, specifically in the area of workforce and retraining, is going to be the most successful. Legislators are always have an ear to the ground for their constituents, and their constituents are going to get angry if they start losing their jobs. If Microsoft can go to the government and say, we would love to get on top of this problem early and work with you, then I think the government is going to be more than receptive to ideas where, whether funds are being offered for Microsoft to plan or whether funds are being matched. Obviously, that's a politics game. But it's something that should definitely be started now so that it doesn't blindside anyone.
I want to emphasize real quick that there's a couple different issues that Microsoft's going to be looking at in cybersecurity. Because earlier when you were speaking to everything being housed in the cloud, so if Microsoft's going to make this a cloud-based AI rather than an AI software package that they distribute, that's going to increase the onus on Microsoft to defend that cloud. That's going to put a huge target on Azure or whatever system it is that you use, because it's now suddenly far more valuable than the information currently being housed, being emails, Microsoft 365, things like that. When you're dealing with financial information, loan applications, everything like that, that just increases the value of that data. So there's that internal training that's necessary to defend your cloud, and then there's the external that Emily and Destiny Rose were just speaking to. But I want to make sure that that's not understated, the burden that Microsoft's going to face if you're going to bring the financial institution into your cloud.
So with Azure, we already have a large percentage of people's information in the cloud because we have IaaS, which is basically building out an infrastructure as a service within a cloud. So a lot of small companies already have their entire infrastructure put into the cloud, and they have small devices, whether it be laptops or PCs or handheld devices, that they attach to that and utilize all of their systems that are already based there. So it's definitely something we're very aware of and very conscious of. Back to the question about the EU's information standards that they hold to. We've been utilizing the EU standards for PPIA for many, many years. Because we are a globally based company, we do look at the most restrictive. But do you feel like that the U.S. banking environment should be held to those standards for the EU, or are you saying that Microsoft, as the supplier of this financial AI, should hold ourselves to that?
Yes. I'll get into that. So, with that suggestion, what we're saying is, one, Microsoft, you only want to design one product, right? And you want that to be useful globally, which means it needs to kind of reach that, in this case, the highest common denominator of standard, of security standards, which is the GDPR. So there's that reason it's economical for y'all to design one product. But also, based on all of our research when we were discussing this issue, we really think that the EU standards that are being implemented in a month are going to come to America in the near future. That, especially given the breaches that have been occurring and the frequency of those breaches, it seems highly likely that the American legislature is going to look to a more secure system of standards. So we're kind of saying design one product that's useful globally and design a product that will still be useful no matter what happens with American standards, because we really believe that we will adopt very quickly similar standards of protecting individuals' information.
Yeah, I just want to comment real quick on that too. I guess just the entire privacy discussion right now in the United States is changing very rapidly, I think. Whether it's in the news, these breaches and the Zuckerberg trials and everything. But on top of that, once artificial intelligence becomes integrated into the banking industry, that privacy discussion is going to be completely revolutionized. And because of that, that's why we think that Microsoft should maintain that highest standard in that sense as well. Because I think that we're going to eventually be up there in that terms of what we understand is our privacy today as well.
Don't you feel like that since we're in the cloud already, and have been for years, and the cloud is a globally based cloud, it is not US based, it's not, I mean, don't you think we should have been there as a country long ago?
I think that has to do with more of the entire American ethos possibly, because I think we're just now shaking off the results of 9/11 and the entire environment that resulted in. I think that, coupled with the recent news coverage of everything, I think our definition and understanding of what is privacy, what it means to have private information is changing. And so I think that's going to be the cause of that change as well.
And how that can affect the AI. If the AI does not actually hold on to the PII, which by definition it should not, right? Why would we need to retrain it?
And that's a great question, and it's one that we suggested as, because we don't know how regulations are going to change. We can't predict that, and so there is a scenario in which you say that, okay, a decision was made and all of these neural networks and pathways are designed, and some of those are designed using somebody's PII, and so in essence, and it's almost like a philosophical question of, is that AI using that individual's information? Even though it doesn't have the specific information, it's still using those pathways that it generated with that individual's information. And so there's a broader question and a lack of definition in the field that we wanted to be cognizant of when we were presenting our recommendations. And so that's kind of what that was inspired by.
So let's relate that back to the human interaction. How is it that you as a human can unlearn something that you learned using information that you no longer can retain?
That's a good question, and that reflects something that I think Microsoft is going to see as it further develops artificial intelligences. Is there is a double standard when you make claims about what an AI can do versus what a human can do. You make these claims about efficiency and effectiveness and fairness and equitability. It's held to a higher standard than a human operator is. When it makes mistakes, it's held to a higher standard than a human operator is, right? A human error is a thing, but your customers don't want to hear that it was AI error, you know? So there are two standards, and that's something that is, when we talk about the American ethos especially, that's something that's present. You know, our technology shouldn't fail us the same way that humans do, or humans can. And so when you're developing these systems, and you have to keep that in mind, that people are going to hold it to a higher standard and apply regulations and apply laws to it that might not even be applicable to humans, such as this one.
Okay? Is that something that we need to actively be aware of and combat?
Yeah, I think as far as being aware of how laws are being applied to AI, I think absolutely. If you're in the financial sector, in the market of designing these AI products, then it's crucial to be aware of both how current regulations are being applied and how people, individuals feel. Because if you're, especially if you're using them in the United States or in any democratic state, if enough people feel uncomfortable, feel like certain standards should be applied, then in theory, within some amount of time, that will happen, democratically. And so, being aware of how people are perceiving the AI and how people are perceiving the way it's using information is crucial to predicting what future regulations there will be and how those will be applied.
Okay, moreover to the double standard. So, right now there is one standard that we have to maintain for PPIA, both here in the United States and the EU and so on. Once AI comes into the scenario, do we need to try to keep that as a level playing field, that it should still be considered as the same? Or do you think that in earnest we should hold an AI to a higher standard than we do today?
I think that there's no way to avoid it being held to a higher standard. I think that the perception of the public perception of AI and all the claims that proponents of AI make about its possibilities generate greater expectations than your typical bank personnel. And so, yeah, I think that that's how they'll be perceived. The public will perceive them as more efficient, more effective, and less prone to failure than a typical human operator. So, yeah, I think Microsoft needs to definitely consider that when it's developing its products.
I'd like to add a little something to that. I agree that technology as a whole is viewed as, like Evan said, more efficient, more effective, and generally better than humans, and otherwise why would we be implementing this if it's not going to do more than what we're doing right now? At the same time, in regard to the double standard that we were referring to, because Microsoft could be at the cutting edge, as we said, of this implementation and the development, and as I talked about setting the standard with open communication, you can say, yes, this will be better, but you shouldn't promise these huge claims, because we've all acknowledged that there will be mistakes and there are data breaches, but that happens just as much, like you said, with human error and human things. So yes, there is a double standard, but I think you have the unique opportunity to stand there and say, this is what we're going to do, this is our AI, this is how it's going to work, it will be better, which is why you should participate in it, but we're not going to promise all the way that it's going to be leaps and bounds ahead of human performance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
At this point in time, this is our debrief time, so this is an opportunity for our client, as well as if there's any other questions from the audience, we'd certainly be happy to take questions from the audience. So are there any audience members that would like to ask a question? Yes, sir.
Yes, I'd like to ask a question. Destiny Rose, you had talked about the fact that AI would eliminate positions,
Yes, sir.
human positions. With most of the writing that's going on right now, and so I'll represent the business community. So if I want an AI system, I want an AI system because it's going to eliminate what humans fail to do. And that is, they get tired, they ask for raises, they want to be off. So at the end of the day, my lowest cost of performance is I have a machine that's pretty reliable, hopefully. And so my question about the loss of human opportunities is, in your studies, have you looked at, in this retraining, how that's going to happen? Because it looks like there's a convergence that's going to occur, whether it's 5 years or 10 years from now. So if I have an 8-year-old that's going to graduate from school 10 years from now and they show up at SMU, What is their future going to look like?
I think in some ways that's unpredictable. As we saw with the digital revolution, we had an idea of where technology was going to go. We've always had an idea of where technology was going to go. You can look at sci-fi movies and say, oh, we'll certainly have flying cars by the time the Jetsons come around. The Jetsons year has passed, and we don't have flying cars because that is not useful, and what is useful is a bullet train. So I think it would be irresponsible for me to tell you that when your child grows up, they should definitely study cybersecurity, because it's possible that we will be in a completely different realm. However, with the question of, I think the question you're getting to is, why would a business want to invest in retraining a worker when it might be more cost effective for them to just get rid of the worker? Is that what you're speaking to?
Well, I mean, that's certainly a decision, for business to make, and I'll give you an example. So I was up at Goldman Sachs a few months ago in New York. So last year they got rid of 38,000 MBA and PhD types. So where do those guys go now that their position has been eliminated due to AI systems?
This is a great question. A lot of places they can go don't necessarily have to be in the field that they are comfortable in or that they self-identify in. A lot of what we talked about, as AI and technology in general advance, we're going to see humans who need jobs a lot less. We're going to see the growth, hopefully, of a post-scarcity economy. And in the long term, hopefully I'll just be able to say to you, well, they don't need to go anywhere. They're taken care of, and they can just go home, and they can paint, or they can write, or they can do whatever personally fulfills them. If that's making chair legs, then that's what it is. In the short term, that is why we are incredibly stressing the need for retraining programs in growing fields, which is currently something like cybersecurity and computer science, and internal replacement, which, although it's a business decision for a company, certainly a product like the one that Microsoft is going to make is going to highly optimize systems. And a CEO would very well be justified in saying, well, feels like I can just drop these people. But banks need people with money to work. And if you have a 30% layoff in the financial sector, you're going to see, let's say, 2-3 point spike in national unemployment minimum. If that 30% is slow, the higher that unemployment gets, the less people start putting their money in banks, the less the economy starts functioning. And no business within the US economy is going to be more profitable if they harm the US economy as a whole. So I think in some ways it might actually be a better long-term game for a lot of companies to internally retrain. You've got more jobs, right? Every company is always trying to grow. Every company is always trying to add something new to improve their business. You can move those people. You can keep those people. Continue being a good corporate citizen and keep the US economy whole and flourishing.
So just to follow on the last question, if that's the case, so we're retraining cyber, and I'm sure Dr. Chang would be more articulate about this, but at the end of the day, what I see is that if you train cyber because we have a need for cyber professionals, that maybe Microsoft doesn't have, well, they have more capacity for that need, but the opportunity of getting that trained person, at least what I see in the schools is, I've got a lot of capacity out here, but I don't have enough people in the pipeline to be trained. And so then the question is, do you have desire, do you have the skill, and can you be trained as a cyber professional and then be effective? So I guess I hear what you're saying, that you want them to retrain internally people that may lead the IT team and become more of a cyber person. But how are you going to fill the pipeline to fill that demand? And I didn't hear that from you guys.
I think a great external way to fill that pipeline, as you're putting it, is the national and local subsidies that we talked a little bit about, and also the public and private partnerships. So here in Texas, we have an education problem. Local scale, it's bad. We have a lot of people dropping out. We have a lot of students that are never getting to college or trade school, because if you don't live in a wealthy neighborhood, then your school sometimes isn't worth going to. And the way that a lot of local populaces are trying to solve that is they're trying to make specific programs, magnet schools, things that a student wants to go to, because then it's a good option. We did that, we saw that after the Sputnik launch in the STEM fields. We, as a United States, realized that STEM was lagging, that we needed to catch up, that we didn't have enough people in the pipeline. And so the federal government said, okay, here's the funding. We need to boost these programs. And I think that in the future, we're going to see public-private partnerships that do the same thing. This might not be as stunning of a Sputnik moment, but it's certainly something that's just as dangerous. And I think that because of that drive, you're going to see colleges like SMU give a scholarship to incoming ethnic minorities and women interested in cybersecurity, because we would love to increase diversity in that field. And also, we need people. And I think that that is going to help fill that pipeline.
Other questions by the audience? Yes.
Tim, I'd like to follow up on the question that was asked of you.
Okay.
The idea that I'm getting is you have a criticism of artificial intelligence in the banking sector that it being less transparent than it currently is. My understanding currently of something like a FICO score, like a credit score, is that it is a very opaque process. When I get my credit score, I can't see the numbers behind that, even though it is a simple system, even though maybe the person in the black box that's doing the calculation could explain it to me in simple terms. That is opaque to me, and probably opaque to the bank that's using that score. I think a question was asked of you earlier of what would an artificial intelligence need to be able to explain about its own process to qualify for this thing that you've asked about, that it can be transparent, that you can see that it's making these decisions. I'm not satisfied with your answer, because I don't know that. I think that the type of artificial intelligence system that you're describing, to me, would be more transparent than what we have now. If I had a system where I could just say, oh, would I have a higher mysterious score if I was female? I would imagine I could just ask this system, okay, all the same variables, but I'm female. Does that change my score at all? To me, that's a more transparent system. What more do you want of an AI system that, to make it more transparent?
The example you provided of like being able to change the input variables only like slightly, a single item that could like essentially you could come out and be like, okay, the outputs have changed and everything else is constant. I think that when those types of scenarios like exist, people like try to point towards specific examples and say like this is what's determining. But I think that when you change even the specific variables like that, other things change when it comes to what the AI is trying to look at. And when that occurs, you have a sense that there's peering through that sort of black box. I want to be able to say unequivocally, or at least with a reasonable amount of doubt, with doubt to a certain degree, that it was the fact that your gender changed. And I think that you could say, oh, well, the only thing that changed was my gender. And that's fine, and things have changed for the credit score. But I think that people want to say that there's like some sort of link between those, but I think that there's this another sense that we want to be able to not only say, okay, well, this is what happened and this is what we're observing on the ins and the outs. People want to be able to point to something. They want to be able to look at that image that we put up earlier and be like, okay, I'm trying to exhibit or explain it from this particular instance and say that this is what changed. And
you want the algorithm to be published? You want to be able to see what the weights are of the hidden layers?
I think that having it published is probably not in the best interests of many companies. I think that that's going to end up being something that people are trying to avoid. I think that the ability to develop open market, or at least open access to AI development tools from some sort of business, probably Microsoft, probably Amazon, being able to put that on the market and enable people to tinker around and see what patterns they are in their development process and what data sets they're using to try and figure out, okay, what is it that's making it so that we're getting these inputs, these data sets, and then different outputs. If it's the evolutions are happening and that is how it ends up occurring and we're still getting radically different outputs, is it because we fed the data inputs slightly differently? Is it because I actually programmed it the slightest bit more? I put a bracket when I should have put a colon or something like that. And I'm explaining it in the terms of like comp sci, but I'm not a computer scientist, so I'm a little bit on. I don't know exactly. I know I'm aware that at this point most of those neural networks are beyond the comprehension of someone who developed it. They don't know how these sorts of things happen. So I believe it was either IBM's Watson or another sort of a program that was trying to come up with a quip in regards to a question that was asked, and it came up with the words meringue harangue or something like that, and rhymed those two words together. The developers had no idea how that happened. They did not feed it either of those words, but it was able to come up with that sort of information. And if that's occurring, then that's another issue entirely.
I'm still not
Yeah,
sure.
I might be
Do you
dancing
want
around
the
the question.
training data to be public? What would make a system in AI more transparent? What would make a system in AI acceptably transparent for you?
Perhaps it's about asking why. Like,
Yeah.
I would say, like, for instance, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act is a law that requires an inquiring customer who asks, why was my credit score denied? They must have explained. So it's asking a human, why did you do this? Well, perhaps the human can say, I did it because of this reason, this reason, this reason, this reason. Well, if you get the artificial intelligence and it's giving you back information, in many cases you can't ask it why. And that terms of explainability is that the artificial intelligence can't necessarily explain what it used to make that decision in many cases. And so it's about mitigating that sort of explanation to maybe add that sort of explanatory behavior like that.
But wouldn't that be part of the programming necessity, is that if the AI says, no, you can't have the loan, it has to give the explanation. These are the reasons why. So, I mean, no more obvious or blatant than it would be for a human factor versus an AI factor. If it can give you the reasons why it denied the loan or didn't make the trade or whatever the case may be, then it's met the same parameters and we're held to the same guidelines.
Mm-hmm. And I think if there is artificial intelligence out there that is capable of that sort of transparency, then that's what we want. But
that would be a regulatory requirement.
Correct.
Yes.
And that's why Microsoft must, and any system, any company developing AI, must devote research to that sort of transparency. And if that currently exists, then, or if Microsoft has that sort of access, has that sort of transparency, then they're already miles ahead of other businesses in terms of regulatory compliance, opaqueness, market stability. So just from our research, we haven't really seen that sort of transparency.
Right. But that would be something we would have to have in order to be able to take an AI to market, is something that could meet regulatory compliance.
Correct. Right.
First of all, I would just like to say what a great job you all did. I so enjoyed hearing you speak. Thank you so much. And I want to apologize to Kelsey for coming in late and having that cell phone. I apologize. You were unflappable. Congratulations. My question actually to all of you is, or to one of you, is about cost. So if you come up with all these great ideas and recommendations, have you thought about the cost for Microsoft in implementation, and does that work out through the pricing models that you talked about a little bit, or have you not thought about that?
So, kind of when I was summing everything up, we do recognize that this is costly, both in time and just tangible resources. And we made these recommendations based off of our conversations with Mr. Smart of Microsoft, because he just time and again emphasized the ethos of Microsoft, where they want to belong in the market, and every time it was that they want to have thought of everything. They want to develop the best product, and they want to take the extra steps, maybe be a little bit slower to market, have it cost a little bit more, but have it be a worthwhile product. There's a reason that Microsoft Word is ubiquitous, because it's a good product, and it takes time to make that. And so when we were factoring all of that in, we were essentially saying that Microsoft is willing to make that investment based off of our conversations with Mr. Smart.
Just to add on a quick point. Also, I think that something that helps is that a lot of the biggest clients are going to be very wealthy companies. So I think the difficulty is going to be targeting those smaller companies, and I think that that'll come later in this process after it's rolled out to individuals like Wells Fargo and bigger banks like that. And they have more resources to devote to buying or contributing to a product that Microsoft has developed that does tend to take a lot of resources.
Other questions from the audience? Oh, yes, sir.
Ben? Right?
Yes.
I wanted to extend off the question you initially asked about, Microsoft offering an auditing program on its own software. You touched on how the government would use Microsoft's program to audit the bank using Microsoft's program. my question is like, is that not a conflict of interest? If not, even though there's the same groups of programmers, would that not create some sort of implicit bias for one system to approve another, since they're based in kind of the same paradigms of frameworks? They're kind of the same people working on creating that.
Yeah, that I actually found that to be a strength, and I touched on system compatibility. And so I would fear that what we want to have is effective auditing systems. And what I would fear is if you had a third party create the auditing system, or had a Microsoft system auditing a different system other than Microsoft, then what you would get is the inability to effectively audit. So to have the knowledge of these intricate systems and to be able to understand what's really going on can lead to a better outcome in terms of the effectiveness of the audit. Does that answer your question?
Perfectly, thank you.
And if Microsoft were to bias their auditing systems, then that would be corporate fraud. So that would not be in there.
Don't commit.
Yeah, by all means, I didn't want to imply that they would like explicitly do it. I just thought maybe just because it's the same sets of programmers or something, that there might happen to be an implicit bias coming from that.
I also, in my research, there's a type of AI or auditing system being created. It's called verifiable data audit, and it's an application in the medical field because artificial intelligence is really applicable in the medical field. And you need similar types of transparency, like why did you diagnose me with this? You can't just say, I saw this, you have this, and not be able to explain. And in those types of systems, they're looking into having a type of blockchain component where you can have a third party peer in and see why you made that decision, and it's unable to be changed. Everything's marked. You can see who has interacted with the system. So that would help uphold certain standards and eliminate the bias that you're worried about in that situation.
Awesome. Thank you so much.